Everyone, in this video what I want to do is I want to go into a little bit of the genealogy of morality, Twilight of the Idols, and finally go through a few bits of Nietzsche's The Antichrist. Alright everyone, in this video we'll get into the genealogy of morality by Nietzsche. This is one of his later works, 1887. What I want to do here is go into a little bit of the preface. I'm going to spend most of the time in here talking about the first essay. I'll mention a few things about the second and third essays, I think, and then move on to, I think, the Antichrist in here. And so we're looking at the later writings of Nietzsche. This is some of the latest stuff he wrote. Remember, he dies in 1900, so we're 13 years out here. Let's start with this first section of the preface. This is perhaps, personally, one of my favorite passages in Nietzsche right here, this first section of the preface. You've probably heard me quote it before. He says this: "We are unknown to ourselves, we knowers, even to ourselves. And there's a good reason for this. We have never looked for ourselves. So how are we ever supposed to find ourselves? How right is the saying," quoting Jesus, "where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Our treasure is where the hives of our knowledge are. As born winged insects and intellectual honey gatherers, like drones, we are constantly making for them, concerned at heart with only one thing: to bring something home. As far as the rest of life is concerned, the so-called experiences, who of us ever has enough seriousness for them, or enough time? I fear we have never really been with it in such matters. Our heart is simply not in it, and not even our ear. On the contrary, like somebody divinely absent-minded and sunk into his own thoughts, who, the 12 strokes of midday having just boomed into his ear like a church clock or like a bell, ding 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 ding, or a watch going off at noon. This is something in the modern day we don't get to the same degree, even though sometimes if you were on campus you might hear the bells ring or ding. It goes off and we go, wait, what time is it again? Or if you've ever done something, you're like, wait, how late is it? Like me recording this video at 4 o'clock in the morning. What hour struck? Sometimes we too, afterwards, rub our ears and ask, astonished, taken aback, what did we actually just experience then? Or even, who are we in fact? And afterwards, as I said, we count all 12 reverberating strokes of our experience, of our life, of our being, and lose count. We remain strange to ourselves out of necessity. We do not understand ourselves. We must confusedly mistake who we are. The motto, "Everyone is furthest from himself," applies to us forever. We are not knowers when it comes to ourselves. So Nietzsche is making the claim here that we don't know ourselves. Now this is something that Freud is going to, that I think anticipates Freud, and Freud is going to dwell on this notion of we don't really know ourselves as well as we think we do. Marx has already kind of said it in terms of ideology, like the way that we think the world is mistaken. Some of that he gets from Kant, in just saying that, the way that we have our transcendental unity of the apperception is not the way things are. So there's a distinction between appearance and reality. But Nietzsche's saying here, we don't know ourselves. Not just we don't know reality, we don't know us very well. I don't think he read Soren Kierkegaard, but the beginning of Soren Kierkegaard's The Sickness Unto Death makes a similar kind of observation, in that we don't know ourselves, and Kierkegaard will say, therefore we're in despair. We don't know it necessarily, because he gives different versions of despair, but we don't know ourselves very well, and so the self, the me, the das Ich, the I, as English translators of Freud will call it, the ego, we don't really know it. We think if we were to ask ourselves, who's the expert on you? We would think, well, me. I know myself better than anybody else. Nietzsche's saying, not so much, because we've never really looked for ourselves. We can't find ourselves. We just do what we do, and we really don't have an undergirding understanding of ourselves. He says conclusively, we are not knowers when it comes to ourselves. There's a certain sense in which we might know other people better than ourselves, and that other people know us better than ourselves. You might have friends or family that probably know things better about you than you do yourself, even though often we, in arrogance, think that we know ourselves best. Nietzsche's saying here, we don't, not so much. And that's the opening here of the preface. And while I admire the preface, let's go ahead and there are 7 additional components of the preface. Let's go ahead and take a look at the beginning of the first essay, the first section here. Let's see what Nietzsche says. These first essay, good and evil, good and bad. Okay, Gut und Böse, I believe in German, like beyond good and evil, and then Gut und Schlecht, if memory serves. So Böse meaning like evil, like the ultimate bad. Bad being Schlecht, like something kind of bad, but not as superlative as evil. What does he say here in this first section? These English psychologists, who have to be thanked for having made only attempts so far to write a history of the emergence of morality, provide us with a small riddle in the form of themselves. In fact, I admit that as living riddles, they have a significant advantage over their books. They're actually interesting. These English psychologists, just what do they want? You always find them at the same task, whether they want to or not, pushing the partie honteuse of our inner world to the foreground and looking for what is really effective, guiding and decisive for our development, where man's intellectual pride would at least wish to find it. For example, in the vis aeternii of habit, or in forgetfulness, or in blind and random couplings of ideas, or in something purely passive, automatic, reflexive, molecular, and thoroughly stupid. What is it that actually drives these psychologists in precisely this direction all the time? Is it a secret, malicious, mean instinct to belittle man, which is perhaps unacknowledged? Or perhaps a pessimistic suspicion, the mistrust of disillusioned, surly idealists who have turned poisonous and green? Or a certain subterranean, that is, below the earth, animosity and racine towards Christianity and Plato, which has perhaps not even passed the threshold of the consciousness, or even a lewd taste for the strange, for the painful paradox, for the dubious and nonsensical in life. Or finally, a bit of everything, a bit of meanness, a bit of gloominess, a bit of anti-Christianity, a bit of thrill and need for pepper, people wanting spice in their lives. But people tell me they are just old, cold, boring frogs, crawling around men and hopping into them as if they were in their element, namely a swamp. I am resistant to hearing this, and indeed I do not believe it. And if it is permissible to wish where it is impossible to know, I sincerely hope that the reverse is true, that these analysts holding a microscope to the soul are actually brave, generous, and proud animals who know how to control their own pleasure and pain and have been taught to sacrifice desirability to truth, every truth, even a plain, bitter, ugly, foul, unchristian, immoral truth, because there are such truths. Here, in a long-winded way, Nietzsche's saying here, finally, people are trying to get at the nature of what humanity is. In a certain sense, these English psychologists are bold, but and they're getting at something, but they're, as he's already established in the preface, we don't really know ourselves, and maybe they're doing something that's going to get at that. Psychologists and psychology are going to get at who we really are, but when we almost like if you've ever lifted, especially in nature, maybe in your backyard, maybe in the woods, if you ever lifted up a rock, okay, you find a big rock in your backyard, and you pick it up, you're going to find lots of, um, as Timon and Pumbaa would say, grub underneath it. Might find beetles and leeches, and there's going to be a lot of dark things under there that you're not going to like, but they're there. That swamp is underneath, and maybe, just maybe, the human sciences are getting at the fact that there's a lot underneath the surface that has been previously undiscovered and is kind of dirty and dark, and we're going to get at precisely that. Let's take a look now at section 10. This is on page 400 even of the Nietzsche text. He starts here talking about the notion of Sklavenmoral, slave morality. This is something that's been going on, at least conceptually, in Nietzsche since the birth of tragedy. What does he say here? In terms of talking about its origins, this is the genealogy of morality, after all. He says, the beginning of the slave's revolt morality occurs when ressentiment itself turns creative. Remember, ressentiment is this frustration of not being able to get done the things that we want to do. Like, we want to do stuff, but we can't. We have this feeling of, oh, I wish I could do that, but I'm incapable. I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have the will. I don't have the power. So ressentiment is that feeling. All right, it looks like resentiment, and it is related to the English word resentment, but it's this feeling of I can't do the things that I want to do. So he says the beginning of the slave's revolt in morality occurs when ressentiment itself turns creative and gives birth to values. So you know what? We can't do what we're going to do. Well, hey, we're going to come up with values that say, hey, the things that we can't accomplish, those things are bad anyway. The things that we can't get for ourselves. So, for example, if we can't acquire the things that we want through power and other people can, we're going to say, you know what, stealing is wrong. If we can't attack others and kill them in a way that we want, murder's wrong. That's what we'll say. Like, the things that we can't acquire, those things are wrong. So take your moral values, and what Nietzsche's saying here is that the feeling of ressentiment often, not in every case, but can produce that we think something is wrong when we can't do it. This is very different from Marx. So for a Nietzschean responding to Marx might say, hey, the proletariat, against the bourgeoisie, well, they can't be rich because they don't have the financial and economic wherewithal. Of course they're going to say that being rich is wrong. Okay, that's this kind of mentality. That's a kind of Sklavenmoral. Okay, but what Nietzsche says here, at least explicitly, is this: that the slave's revolt in morality occurs when ressentiment itself turns creative and gives birth to values. The ressentiment of those beings who, being denied the proper responsive action, compensate for it with imaginary revenge. Notice how this is also anticipating Freud, the notion of compensating for something. Here, it's this. They can't do the things that they want to do, so they're going to compensate for it with an imaginary revenge, and those are values. The things that we can't do, those things are wrong. And God's going to judge you for the things that we can't do because you're doing them, because you're wrong, because you're doing the things that you can do. But those things are wrong. That's what Nietzsche's getting at. Whereas all noble, that is strong, morality grows out of a triumphant saying yes to itself. Sklavenmoral, slave morality, says no, on principle to everything that is outside, under other, non-self, and this no is its creative deed. This reversal of the evaluating glance, this inevitable orientation to the outside instead of back onto itself, is a feature of ressentiment. In order to come about, Sklavenmoral, slave morality, first has to have an opposing external world. It needs, physiologically speaking, external stimuli in order to act at all. Its action is basically a reaction. The reaction of ressentiment is other people are successful doing the things that we're going to do, the things that we can't do. So we're going to say, well, those things are wrong, and they're bad. And they might even be evil. The opposite is the case with the noble, that is the strong method of valuation. This acts and grows spontaneously, seeking out its opposite only so that it can say yes to itself, even more thankfully and exultantly. Its negative concept, low, common, bad, is only a pale contrast created after the event compared to its positive basic concept, saturated with life and passion. We, the noble, the good, the beautiful, and the happy. When the noble method of valuation makes a mistake, sins against reality, this happens in relation to the sphere with which it is not sufficiently familiar, a true knowledge of which it has indeed rigidly resisted. In some circumstances, it misjudges the sphere it despises, that of the common man, the rabble. On the other hand, we should bear in mind that the distortion which results from the feeling of contempt, disdain, and superciliousness, always assuming that the image of the despised person is distorted, remains far behind. The distortion with which the entrenched hatred and revenge of the powerless man attacks his opponent in effigy, like almost like a model, of course, like a straw man. Like what he's saying here is the weak person always like invents like a fake version of their opponent and then beats up on them. Like, hey, you're so stupid. Like rich people are so stupid. They're like this, and I'm gonna beat them up, and they're bad. And you have versions of that which you hate, especially when you find yourselves in weakness, is what Nietzsche is saying. These people, the common man, the rabble, on the other hand, we should bear in mind that the distortion which results from the feeling of contempt, disdain, and superciliousness, always assuming that the image of the despised person is distorted, remains far behind the distortion with which the entrenched hatred and revenge of the powerless man attacks his opponent, in effigy, of course. Indeed, contempt has too much negligence, nonchalance, complacency, and impatience, even too much personal cheerfulness mixed into it, for it to be in a position to transform its object into a real caricature and monster. Nor should one fail to hear the almost kindly nuances which the Greek nobility, for example, places in all words which it uses to distinguish itself from the rabble. So he's saying here, consider even ancient Greek words, the way that they tried to distinguish themselves from the common people who are just whining about their incapability, is what Nietzsche's getting at. A sort of sympathy, consideration, and indulgence incessantly permeates and sugars them, with the result that nearly all words referring to the common man remain as expressions for unhappy and pitiable. So he's saying here, when we're talking about the common people, the average person, really all the words seem to evoke this notion of unhappiness. Like, we might think of common as like a baseline. He's saying the ancient Greeks had words where the common or the average person evokes the notion of unhappiness and disappointment, discontentedness, weakness. He says, compare dailos, poneros, moktheros, moktheros. The last two actually designating the common man as a slave worker and a beast of burden. On the other hand, bad, low, and unhappy have never ceased to reverberate in the Greek ear in a tone in which unhappy predominates. This is a legacy of the old, nobler, aristocratic method of valuation. Like these, we're talking about common people. Here's all these words for weakness, and you see them down here in your your footnotes. These are the words for common or the average person. Like we might say average person. This comes up today. Like we talk about the average American. The average American isn't a good person. The average American is this low-born, miserable, worthless, wretched, paltry, wretched, worthless, base, cowardly, wretched, miserable, worthless person. When we're talking about the crowd, the herd, the average person, which does not deny itself even in contempt. Philologists will remember in the sense in which Ozoros, Anobos, okay, these words. Let's see if I can get these in my Greek. Klemon, doustukain, cum tempora are used. These words. The well-born felt that they were the happy. That is, the powerful people feel that they're happy. These words. Let's take a look at them. This one, if memory serves, that would be Klemon. Let's see if it has it down here for us. Yeah, Klemon. Endurance. Can put up with stuff. They can deal with suffering. Dustaikein. What do we have here? Unlucky, unhappy, unfortunate. Oh, sometimes bad things happen. This one. Kimpora, or you might say Kimphora if you're doing it in a more modern pronunciation. The PH sound in actually ancient Greek, that's that word, that's that letter, phi. In PH in ancient Greek is actually more like a whispered P, like p, but we say f because the Romans didn't know how to translate this, so they always turned it into an F. This sound right here. Okay, these words. The well-born felt that they were the happy. They did not need, first of all, to construct their happiness artificially by looking at their enemies, or in some cases by talking themselves into it, lying themselves into it, as all men of resentment are wont to do. And also, as complete men bursting with strength and therefore necessarily active, they knew they must not separate happiness from action. That is, he's saying the ancient Greeks had a notion of that happiness is doing something. A passivity is already going to be kind of resentment. The only people who are truly happy for nature are going to be those who do what they want. People who are in a passive, like, no, I try and let let people buy, let people do what they want to do. Any kind of passivity for Nietzsche, that's not life. That's reaction and response. Being active is by necessity counted as a part of happiness. This is the etymological derivation of oi pratein. Let's see if it has this here for us. Actually, eupratein, meaning do well. Do that. That's being active. All very much the opposite of happiness at the level of the powerless. Now stop here. Sometimes we have the sense, especially from Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle, but also Christianity and some versions of religion, that happiness is sort of being still happy. What happiness is for Aristotle, eudaimonia in Greek, literally like good-spiritedness. Happiness is doing nothing and being okay with that. Like all the things that need to be happening, I'm going to deal with that. We see that sometimes in the Stoics. Whatever happens, happens, and I'm okay with that. We see that sometimes in, say, the Epicureans, where, sure, I'm going to pursue happiness, but happiness is simply what I make it in terms of in the world. But there's kind of a passivity to it, and Nietzsche's saying, no, happiness is the stuff you do, not the stuff. It's not a feeling of like, oh, these things happen distant from me, and I'm happy about it. That's not happiness. All very much the opposite of happiness at the level of the powerless, the oppressed, and those rankled with poisonous and hostile feelings, for whom it manifests itself as essentially a narcotic, an anesthetic, rest, peace, Sabbath. People think of happiness as when they're not having to do anything. And he's saying that's not happiness. Relaxation of the mind and stretching of the limbs, in short, as something passive. Nietzsche's saying here that happiness is not something where we get to relax. Think of, we live our lives, we work, and we work, and we work to get to that vacation, to get to the weekend. And then ultimately we have a notion of retirement. That's like super vacation. Like we don't have to work anymore. And that's when we're going to be happy. We're going to be happy. We're happy when we're on vacation. We're happy when we don't have to work. We're happy when we finally get to retire. That's where we want to get to. And Nietzsche's saying none of that is happiness. That is a manufactured, passive version of happiness where you're not going to be happy not doing anything. And so we tend to think of ourselves as most happy as human beings when we're not doing something, and that's mistaken. Now, I do think there are times when we think of ourselves as not doing something when we're actually doing something. I can think of in my teenage years, I'd have friends come over to my house reading a book. I'd be reading a book. They say, like, hey, do you want to go do something? Well, I'm doing something. I'm reading a book. Or watching a movie can be doing something. Playing a video game, I still think is doing something. Um, Thinking is, in my view, still doing something. But he's saying here we still have these notions of what happiness is really not doing anything. You're most happy when you're not having to do something, where you're getting to relax. Relaxation of the mind, stretching of the limbs, in short, of something passive. He's saying that's not happiness. Is Nietzsche's going to get at is when you're most doing something, when you're active, not passive. While the noble man is confident and frank with himself, Genios, let's see what that says. Yeah, noble, high mind, literally bornish, if I'm not mistaken, related to the word generation, like to generate, to be born, like literally noble, high-minded, like really, really born. Genios, related to generation, if I'm reading that rightly in my Greek, of noble birth. Genios, like my father's name. My father's name Eugene, literally, you or oi, good, you, and genes, like to be born, to be generated, literally born good. That's what the name Eugene means, of noble birth, underlines the nuance, upright, and probably naive as well. The man of ressentiment, right, the person who's, oh, I wish I could do this, but I can't. He is neither upright, nor naive, nor honest, nor straight with himself. His soul squints. His mind loves dark corners, secret paths, and back doors. Everything secretive appeals to him as being his world, his security, his comfort. He knows all about keeping quiet, not forgetting, waiting, temporarily humbling and abasing himself. A race of such men of ressentiment will inevitably end up cleverer than any noble race, and will respect cleverness, like just a wittiness to get out of things, to a quite different degree as well, namely as a condition of existence of the first rank, while the cleverness of noble men can easily have a subtle aftertaste of luxury and refinement about it. Precisely because in this area it is nowhere near as important as the complete certainty of function of the governing unconscious instincts, nor indeed as important as a certain lack of cleverness, such as a daring charge at danger or at an enemy, or those frenzied sudden fits of anger, love, reverence, gratitude, and revenge by which noble souls down the ages have recognized one another. So he's saying here there's a certain sense in which those who are strong, they feel emotions strongly, and that what it is to be clever is to kind of, no, I want to get out of this, of expressing myself, so that I seem what's most appropriate at the moment. So think of people trying to manipulate a situation, going, okay, I need to look this way, so I appeal to these people in this way, and people think of me in this way. That's cleverness. There is an intelligence behind it. I want to look this way, I want to feel this way, I'm going to behave this way, so that I get these certain responses rather than being myself. I'm the person who has no ressentiment just is themselves. The person who has ressentiment, well, how can I make, you is more manipulative, is really more of a deceiver. Okay, maybe I want this person to really, I want them to get along with me, so I'm going to say something where I make them sad, and they feel sad, and I'm expressing some sadness, and now they're my friend because I've expressed sadness in a certain way. No. The strong person, on the other hand, is just say what they feel, what they think, what they believe. They're not clever. They're not having to figure out what will be most advantageous to me in the situation. They just do what they do, and that's what's advantageous. When ressentiment does occur in the nobleman himself, it is consumed and exhausted in immediate reaction, and therefore does not poison. On the other hand, it does not occur in countless cases where it is unavoidable for all who are weak and powerless to be unable to take his enemies, his misfortunes, and even his misdeeds seriously for long. That is, you could say the weak person cannot hang. That is the sign of the strong, rounded natures with a superabundance of a power which is flexible, formative, healing, and can make one forget. A good example from the modern world is Mirabeau, who had no recall for the insults and slights directed at him and could not forgive simply because he forgot. There's a certain sense in which strength is the power of forgetfulness. So even someone, you might think of someone as, sometimes we think of this as someone arrogant, powerful, but they hold a grudge, like, oh, I'm going to have revenge against you. That person's weak, actually, for Nietzsche. The person who is vengeful, if they can't let things go, let stuff consume them, let revenge consume them, that person's a weakling, because they're letting all these weak notions control them. To be powerful is to be control in oneself. If someone remembers wrongs, so even when we think of people as powerful, like tyrants, if someone like, say, someone like Louis XIV or Joseph Stalin, you know, someone said something and they're like, oh, they said something disgraceful to me, I'm going to execute them. That's not strength, that's weakness. That's exactly this. That's this kind of ressentiment, timidity. They can't deal with it. The strong person forgets. They don't have a memory where they remember wrongs. They just go, oh, someone doesn't like me? Whatever, I don't care. That's strength. Going, someone insulted me, someone said all these terrible things about me. The person who goes, they said these terrible things about me, I want revenge. That's actually weakness. Strength is, someone said terrible things about me? Who? I don't care. A man like this shakes from him with one shrug many worms which would have burrowed in another man. Here and here alone is it possible, assuming that it's possible at all on earth, to truly love your enemies. Nietzsche's playing on Christianity here. This is what it is to love your enemies, to not hate them, to go, wait, who are you again? You said something bad about me? Yeah, I don't care because I don't know who you are. I don't know you. Who are you again? That's strength for Nietzsche. Not to be... there's a certain sense in which there's something echoing Stoicism here. The Stoics going, oh, I'm not going to let feelings harm me. Nietzsche's not saying that exactly, but to go, to be controlled by feelings in myself that other people say, that's weakness. Don't be controlled, don't be dictated by others. And so there's a certain sense in which Nietzsche's saying, indirectly, loving your enemies is going, who are you? Because you're not embittered against your enemies for what they say. You don't care. You don't give a damn. You don't give a shit. Because you're going, what did you say? I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Because I don't care what you think. And that's strength and power. How much respect a nobleman has for his enemies. In fact, he might like you. Like, hey, I heard you said bad things about me, but you're pretty popular. Like, why'd you say that? Not why'd you say that to get back at you in some way, but hey, why'd you say that? It's interesting that you said that. Let's go into that. I want to explore that more. Someone who is strong in this way can respect their enemies more by actually valuing what they have to say. You could say this, like, for example, say in the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln appointed a bunch of advisors who didn't like him, and he didn't necessarily like them, but he knew that, hey, they were the right people for the job. That was you don't see that very often today or in the 20th century, 21st century at all. Usually there's an ideological jumping in. If you don't have the same kind of ideological underpinnings, you're not going to get appointed to anything. Abraham Lincoln, as a president, was interesting in that he would go, I don't like you. In certain senses, I don't respect you. We don't agree on much. I'm going to put you in this position because you're the best person for the job. Tell me what you think about me, even if it's that you hate me. I think you can see this with his generals, like General McClellan. It wasn't until Grant that he got somebody that was like, okay, Lincoln, I like you too. Before that, whether it be McClellan or Burnside's in the early half of the American Civil War, he was willing to appoint people there, and he would fire them too, but he would be willing to appoint people that opposed his position, and even in cabinet positions, put people in there that opposed his position because he thought they would be valuable in those positions. And going, yeah, did they say bad things about me? Sure. I don't care. I'm not saying Lincoln is the ultimate Ubermensch, but there's a certain sense in which he kind of exemplifies that position. Someone who can put people into place and go, hey, they don't like me, but I like what they're doing. I don't necessarily like them or their personalities. How much respect a nobleman has for all enemies, for all his enemies, and the respect of that sort is a bridge to love, for he insists on having his enemy to himself as a mark of distinction. Indeed, he will tolerate as enemies none other than such as have nothing to be despised and a great deal to be honored. Against this, imagine the enemy is conceived by the man of ressentiment. So he's already saying here, someone who is strong looks at their enemy and goes, yeah, I respect them. They got things I like about them. They got things I admire. Like, my enemy does this, and I wish I could do that. Sometimes you see this maybe in sports, where a coach might say, hey, this other team, they do this really well. I wish we could do that. Let's do that. Whereas, on the other hand, the man of weakness, the man of ressentiment, what's he going to do? And here we have his deed, his creation. He's conceived of the evil enemy, the evil one, as a basic idea to which he now thinks up a copy and a counterpart, the good one himself. So what someone in weakness does is this. They think of their enemy, the people that are in opposition to them, as evil. Oh, they're doing something terribly wrong. All right, because and God judges them because they're different, because they're doing something different. And it's not just me, it's that God hates them. And Nietzsche's saying the strong person goes, hey, my enemy, they do things differently. I admire that. I respect that. I don't respect everything they say, but I respect parts about them. And I can say they have particular advantages. And with Nietzsche here, like in a philosophical level, I have to say I agree with him. There's a lot of philosophers that I disagree with, but whom I still like. Some of that mentality, I think Nietzsche actually is getting at a kind of notion of epoche, which was something, the virtue of the skeptics, where they said you can know something, but not necessarily agree with it. And I think this is an important philosophical virtue, is to go, here's what something is, and I can describe it, and I can describe, like, whether it be an individual or an ideology or perspective or meta-narrative or whatever, and say, I can describe it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but here's what it is. And I can say, here's things I admire about it. That's why I think Nietzsche can say, sometimes, Nietzsche will say, there are things, he hates Christianity, but he can say, here's things I admire about Christianity. Here's things I admire about Jesus Christ. And you might be thinking, well, if Nietzsche hates Christianity, how can he admire Christianity, and how can he admire Jesus Christ? And he just told you, there are things I could admire about my enemy. It's the person of weakness, the person who is just saturated in ressentiment, who cannot think of anything positive about their enemy. They just have to go, well, it's evil, whatever it is. Whatever they're doing it's wrong, and God's going to judge them, and I hate it, and it's bad, and Nietzsche's saying, part of wisdom, maybe he wouldn't use the word wisdom, but part of this strength, okay, part of this Macht, there's the German word for strength and power, is knowing, hey, my enemy does this, they're good at that. I wish I could get on that. And that's part of strength, is being able to admire one's enemy. It's not exactly Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu, the author of The Art of War, but Nietzsche's getting at something there. Nietzsche continues in section 11 of the first essay saying this. Exactly the opposite is true of the nobleman who conceives of the basic idea of good by himself, in advance and spontaneously, and only then creates a notion of bad. This bad of noble origin and that of evil from the cauldron of unassuaged hatred. The first is an afterthought, a side, a complementary color, whilst the other is the original, the beginning, the actual deed in the conception of Sklavenmoral, slave morality. How different are the two words bad and evil, although both seem to be the opposite for the same concept of good. But it is not the same concept, good. On the contrary, one should ask who is actually evil in the sense of the morality of ressentiment. The stern reply is precisely the good person of the other morality, the noble, the powerful, dominating mad, but retouched, reinterpreted, and reviewed through the poisonous eye of ressentiment. He's saying here that when we're talking about the strong person uses good, like things that are beneficial to me, and bad as things that are not. The person filled with ressentiment, I wish I could do stuff, but I can't. The evil person, rather, is the one who does all the things that they can't do. And so they think of them as that person that's just bad. They're evil because they're doing all the things that I wish I could do, but I can't do. Here, there is one point which we would be the last to deny. Anyone who came to know these good men as enemies came to know nothing but evil enemies. The same people who are so strongly held in check by custom, respect, habit, gratitude, and even more through spying on one another and through peer group jealousy, who, on the other hand, behave towards one another by showing such resourcefulness and consideration, self-control, delicacy, loyalty, pride, and friendship. They are not much better than the uncaged beasts of prey in the world outside, where the strange, the foreign, begin. There they enjoy freedom from every social constraint. In the wilderness, they compensate for the tension which is caused by being closed in and fenced in by the peace of the community for so long. They return to the innocent conscience of the wild beast as exultant monsters, who perhaps go away having committed a hideous succession of murder, arson, rape, and torture in a mood of bravado and spiritual equilibrium, as though they had simply played a student's prank. Convinced that poets will now have something to sing about and celebrate for quite some time. At the center of all these noble races, we cannot fail to see that the blonde beast of prey, the magnificent blonde beast avidly prowling round for spoil and victory, this hidden center needs release from time to time. The beast must out again, must return to the wild. A couple things here. One, we see this notion of you saying that something restraint can be a kind of problem, and therefore there's a certain sense in which that who is unrestrained needs to experience everything they want to in an unrestrained way. Now you see this this notion of blonde beast. The Nazis later are going to love this. Oh, it's a blonde beast. You know, the person who has blonde, blue eyes, the Aryans, that's the person that we want. When Nietzsche says blonde beast here, he's referring to a lion. The animal, a lion. The strong animal of the lion. Who prowls around for spoil and victory. And the lion does and accomplishes what accomplishes through strength, not through going, oh, I know the animals I prey upon are weak, and if I stop and think about it for a while, like, you know, the antelope really upset me today, and no, a lion doesn't do this. A lion is a proud beast, an animal, and the Germans have a word for, the German word for beast is Tier. And this word shows up often in a lot of animals' names. So we have Tier, and the word for whatever pig is, it escapes me right now, but almost any animal in German is either some kind of Tier or some kind of Schwein. There we go. The German word for, like, so something like a hedgehog in English. Word hog evokes like a pig. So something might be a Schwein. In other ways, Schwein, like swine, being a pig. The blonde beast, on the other hand, like a lion, does whatever it wants. And he's saying that there's certain types of this kind of nobility that we see. People that just prance around as prowling around for spoil and victory, whether it be Romans, Arabs, Germans, Japanese, Homeric heroes like Heracles or Hercules, Scandinavian Vikings. It need not be noticed in here. It's not just Germans, and it's not just white guys. Like, there's all different kinds of examples of the powerful and the strong. In this requirement, they are all alike. It was the noble races which left the concept of barbarian in their traces wherever they went. Even their highest culture betrays the fact that they were conscious of this and indeed proud of it. For example, when Pericles, one of the main facilitators of Athens, in that famous funeral oration, tells his Athenians, "Our daring has forced a path to every land and sea, erecting timeless memorials to itself, everywhere for good and ill." This daring, and that's from Thucydides or Thucydides, this daring of the noble races, mad, absurd, and sudden in the ways it manifests itself, the unpredictability and even the improbability of their undertakings. Pericles singles out, Rathumia of the Athenians, like the Rathumia, Rathumia, literally, that would be kind of like not caring, like apathy. Oh, here you go. Indifference or rashness as a virtue of the Athenians for praise, their unconcern and scorn for safety, body, life, comfort, their shocking cheerfulness and depth of delight in all destruction, and all the debauches of victory and cruelty. All this, for those who suffered it, was summed up in the image of barbarian, the evil enemy. Literally, barbarian, barbaros in Greek, the one who doesn't speak Greek, because the Greeks thought of people that didn't speak Greek as it's like they were saying bar 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 bar, hence barbarian. The barbarian, the evil enemy, perhaps the Goth or the Vandal. That's in Roman times, the Goths and the Vandals, German tribes coming into Rome. The deep and icy mistrust which the German arouses as soon as he comes to power, which we see again even today, is still the aftermath of that indistinguishable horror with which Europe viewed the raging of the blonde Germanic beast. Again, the Nazis like this blonde Germanic beast. He's using the imagery of a lion. Although between the old Germanic peoples and us Germans, there is scarcely an idea in common, let alone a blood relationship. What Nietzsche's saying in here is the German tribes, the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, those are not us today. We're doing something different. But in spite of that, I once remarked on Hesiod's dilemma when he thought up a series of cultural eras and tried to express them in gold, silver, and iron. We do this with even comic books, or you can think of like the Gold Age of comics, the Silver Age of comics, the Bronze Age of comics, where he's saying, when you're talking about different eras, we have the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and so forth. When Hesiod was trying to say gold, silver, and iron ages, he could find no other solution to the contradiction presented to him by the magnificent but at the same time so shocking violent world of Homer than to make two eras out of one, which he now placed one behind the other. First, the era of heroes, so there's the age of heroes in the past, and demigods from Troy and Thebes, as the world which remained in the memory of the noble races which had their ancestors in it. Then the Iron Era, as that same world appears to the descendants of the downtrodden, robbed, ill-treated, and those carried off and sold, as an era of iron, hard, as I said, cold, cruel, lacking feeling and conscience, crushing everything and coating with blood. So he's saying, Hesiod did this thing where he said there's the age of heroes and there's the age of iron. There were the ancient heroes, the demigods, people who accomplished things, and then an age of difficulty, which we have today. Like, where there's no heroes in the same sense today. Everything's difficult today. Assuming that what is at any rate believed as truth were indeed true, that is the meaning of all culture, to breed a tame and civilized animal, a household pet, out of a beast of prey, man, dimension, then one would undoubtedly have to view all instinctive reaction and instinctive ressentiment, by means of which noble races and their ideals will finally wrecked and overpowered, as the actual instruments of culture. Which, however, is not to say that the bearers of these instincts were themselves representatives of the culture. Instead, the opposite would not only be probable, no, it is visible today. These bearers of oppressive, vindictive instincts, the descendants of all Europeans and non-European slavery, in particular the pre-Aryan population, represent the decline of mankind. These instruments of culture are a disgrace to man. More grounds for suspicion of, or an argument against, culture in general. We may be quite justified in retaining our fear of the blonde beast at the center of every noble race, and remain on our guard. But who would not, 100 times over, prefer to fear, if he cannot admire at the same time, rather than not fear, but thereby permanently retain the disgusting spectacle of the failed, the stunted, the wasted away, and the poisoned? And is that not our fate? What constitutes our aversion to man today, for we suffer from man, no doubt about that, not fear, rather the fact that we have nothing to fear from man, that man is first and foremost a teeming mass of worms, the tame man who is incurably mediocre and unedifying, that is, he's boring and he doesn't build up, has already learnt to view himself as the aim and pinnacle. Nietzsche is saying, this is what we take as kind of the ideal person today, someone boring and doesn't do anything. Be normal. Don't ruffle any feathers, don't shake things up. That's the person you should be. Don't challenge things. The person, they're challenging things, they're saying things they shouldn't, that's just inappropriate. That person we take the normal, like the ideal today we take is to someone to be boring. The meaning of history. The higher man. Yes, the fact that he has a certain right to feel like that so far as he feels distance from the superabundance of failed, sickly, tired, and exhausted people of whom today's Europe is beginning to reek. And insofar as he is at least relatively successful, at least still capable of living, at least saying yes to life. Again, Nietzsche, not a nihilist, yes to life. If anything, the nihilist is the person of strong ressentiment. I'm weak, I can't do anything, but I'm going to whine about things. Everything's difficult today. People, and you know what's really difficulty is the fact that there's people doing things that I can't do, and the people who do things that I can't do, the people who get to enjoy things I can't enjoy, the people who have more money than I possibly have, all those, you know what, those people are evil. And that's what Nietzsche's getting at. That power and strength and goodness and life is enjoying life in the moment, doing things for life. And to be passive and go, I don't like this, and I don't want to have to do anything about it, but I don't like it. That is weakness for Nietzsche in this first essay of the Genealogy of Morality. And let's take a look at these sections, I think 13 and 16. Look what he says, that is Nietzsche, in section 13. But let us return to the problem of the other origin of good as thought up by the man of ressentiment, demands its solution. There is nothing strange about the fact that lambs bear grudge towards large birds of prey. So he's saying here, like, those that are weak don't like the strong. You know, the bird of prey is evil. The one that, you know, preys on us, devours us. That's bad, and it's sad. But that is no reason to blame the large birds of prey carrying off the little lambs. And if the lambs say to each other, those birds of prey are evil, and whoever is least like a bird of prey and most like the opposite, a lamb, is good, isn't he? Then there is no reason to raise objections to the setting up of an ideal beyond the fact that the birds of prey will view it as somewhat derisively and perhaps say, we don't bear any grudge at all towards those good lambs. In fact, we love them. Nothing is tastier than the tender lamb. So think about the animal kingdom and those that are strong and powerful. Lions, bears, tigers, birds of prey, going, we like weak animals, like they're really tasty. And the weak animals, if they could think, going, oh, can you believe these are evil animals that try and destroy us. It is just as absurd to ask strength not to express itself as strength, not to be as a desire, to overthrow, crush, become master, to be a thirst for enemies, resistance, and triumphs, as it is to ask weakness to express itself as strength. Think of the song Jesus Loves Me. They are weak, but he is strong. Okay? Or Jesus being, and sometimes Jesus Christ is expressed in almost a dialectic of there's the lamb version of Jesus. He suffered wherever he wanted, but he's also the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He's going to destroy. He's got the name written on his thigh. He's going to come back and say, I'm going to punish everyone. In, say, the book of Revelation. Two Jesuses you got. Nietzsche likes one of them, not the other. But he's saying here, imagine a quantum force is just such a quantum of drive, will, action. In fact, it is nothing but this driving, willing, and acting, and only the seduction of language and the fundamental errors of reason petrified within it, which construes and misconstrues all action as conditional upon an agency, a subject, can make it appear otherwise. And just as the common people separates a lightning from its flash and takes the latter to be a deed, something performed by a subject, which is called lightning, popular morality separates strength from the manifestations of strength, as though there were an indifferent substratum behind the strong person which had the freedom to manifest strength or not. But there is no such substratum. There is no being behind the deed. Its effect and what becomes of it, the doer, is invented as an afterthought. Kant. The doing is everything. Did you do that? How could you? Nietzsche saying that this is the modern construal of reality and morality. Basically, the common people double a deed. When they see lightning, they make doing a deed out of it. They posit the same event first as cause and then as effect. And he's saying this is deontology, this is Kantian morality. There's what someone did, and then what does it do? The scientists do no better when they say force moves, force causes, and such like. All our science, in spite of its coolness and freedom from emotion, still stands exposed to the seduction of language, and has not ridded itself of the changelings foisted upon it in the subjects. The atom, for example, just as a changeling, likewise the Kantian Ding on sich thing in itself. No wonder, then, if the entrenched, secretly smoldering emotions of revenge and hatred put this belief to their own use, in fact, do not defend any belief more passionately than the strong are free to be weak, and the birds of prey are free to be lambs. In this way, they gain the right to make birds of prey responsible for being birds of prey. That those, say, animals that devour, well, how could they? Can you believe that they cause others to suffer? But they're birds of prey. That's what they do. That's where they are on the food chain. That's where on the evolutionary hierarchy. That's what they do. But we think of things that devour as bad. Keep in mind, all living things consume. All living things devour. You could be the most benign vegetarian in the world. Nevertheless, you devour some kind of life that is less than you. You might think of other kinds of life as higher. Animal life should not be consumed, but some kind of life should be consumed. He says this, imagine the mind of the weak. We weak people are just weak. It's good to do nothing for which we are not strong enough. And he's saying this is the predicament. Weak people, they see their weakness and they almost relish it. And those that are stronger than them, they are jealous of. They would like to emulate, but they can't. And so when they can't emulate it for a lack of weakness, or for a lack of strength, and because of weakness, they therefore decry that which they cannot do as evil. Nietzsche says in section 16, let's draw to a close. The two opposing values, good and bad, good and evil. Good and bad is just describing things as they are. Like good's good, bad is weakness. Good and evil, on the other hand, is good is weakness, and evil is, oh, can you believe someone has strength? They are inverted notions of each other. They fought a terrible battle for thousands of years on Earth, and although the latter has been dominant for a long time because of Judaism and Christianity, there is still no lack of places where the battle remains undecided. You could even say that in the meantime it has reached even greater heights, but at the same time has become even deeper and more intellectual, so that there is today perhaps no more distinguishing feature of the higher nature, the intellectual nature, than to be divided in the sense and really and truly a battleground for those opposites. The symbol of this fight, written in the script which has hitherto remained legible throughout human history, Rome against Judea, Judea against Rome. Up to now, there has been no greater event than this battle, this question, this contradiction of mortal enemies. Rome saw the Jew as something contrary to nature, as though he were its polar opposite, a monster. In Rome, the Jew was looked upon as convicted of hatred against the whole of mankind. Rightly, if one is right in linking the well-being and future of the human race with the unconditional rule of aristocratic, that is, powerful values, Roman values. What, on the other hand, did the Jews feel about Rome? We can guess from 1,000 indicators. It's enough to call once more to the mind of the Apocalypse of John, the wildest of all outbursts ever written. That's the book of Revelation, which revenge has on its conscience. By the way, we must not underestimate the profound consistency of Christian instinct of inscribing this book of hate, the disciple of love. That is, the book of Revelation has a lot of, things are going to be coming, like all the bad things, all those evil people, they're going to get what's coming to them. This is written by John of Patmos, maybe John the disciple, who was the disciple that Jesus loved. He's saying, of course, on Christian instinct, this notion of John being the disciple of love, talking about love in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and if it's the same John that wrote Revelation, he's talking about all the bad things that happen, how those people are going to get what's coming to them. By contrast, as opposed to the Romans, the Jews were a priestly nation of ressentiment par excellence. They're the best at ressentiment, possessing an unparalleled genius for popular morality. Compare peoples with similar talents, such as Chinese or the Germans, with the Jews, and you will realize who are first-rate and who are fifth. Which of them has prevailed for the time being, Rome or Judea? But there is no trace of doubt. Just consider whom you bowed down to in Rome today, as though the embodiment of the highest values, not just in Rome, but over nearly half the earth, everywhere where man has become tame or wants to become tame, to 3 Jews, as we know, or 1 Jewess, to Jesus of Nazareth, Peter the fisherman, Paul the carpet weaver, tanner, and the mother of Jesus mentioned first, whose name was Mary. He's saying today, look at the world today. Who's in power in the world? You got these Christian heroes. Jesus, Peter, Paul, Mary. This is very remarkable. Without a doubt, Rome has been defeated. There's no testaments to Zeus today in Catholicism. However, in the Renaissance, there was a brilliant, uncanny reawakening of the classical ideal of the noble method of valuing everything. Rome itself woke up as though from a suspended animation under the pressure of the new Judaic Rome built over it, which looked like an ecumenical synagogue and was called Die Kirche, Ecclesia, the church. But Judea triumphed again at once, thanks to that basically proletarian ressentiment movement, which people called the Reformation, including its inevitable consequence, the restoration of the church, as well as the restoration of the ancient tomb-like silence of classical Rome. He's saying here, this is different from Marx, where Marx was almost admiring the Reformation. Marx was saying that the Reformation got kind of the notion of the critical question going. Nietzsche, on the other hand, is saying the Reformation was a continual approbation or valuing of cowardice in this old ancient morality, which he calls it tomb-like. All right, a celebration of death and not of life. a celebration of losers and not of heroes. People doing, engaging in mediocrity. Jesus, Peter, Paul, Mary, but being celebrated as heroes because of their inability to celebrate life and to celebrate freedom and to celebrate doing things, but rather what are they celebrated for? Their hesitancy. Oh, don't do this. Don't do that. Don't be powerful. Be weak. They are weak, but he is strong. No. Resist. Don't engage. And Nietzsche saying this is the calamity of the West and the Christian heritage, the Jewish Christian heritage. Again, I don't like the phrase Judeo-Christian because I think it means nothing. But if we could apply it here, he says that what the Jewish and Christian heritage have going for it is a celebration of weakness that results in ressentiment and not a celebration of strength. And that is problematic. Right, now we're going to move on to the next piece from the next year, 1888. Götzendämmerung, which is Twilight of the Idols, or How to Philosophize with a Hammer. And he starts this off with some maxims, these little pithy sayings. I'm going to go over a couple of them. Some of these are esoteric. That is, they involve a little bit of wherewithal to figure out what they're getting at. So, for example, number 3, to live alone, you must be an animal or a god, says Aristotle in Politeia. He left out the third case. You must be both a philosopher. Maybe that's referring to Kant. An animal and a god. Maybe not. Here's one that's well known. From the military school of life. Was macht mich umbringt, macht mich stärker. Whatever does not kill me makes me stronger. You've probably heard this expression before. Here it is in Nietzsche. Whatever does not kill me makes me stronger. If you're going through a struggle, the struggle makes you who you are. That is what Nietzsche, I think, is expressing in this. 12. If you have your why for life, then you can get along with almost any how. Man does not strive for happiness. Only the English do that. If you know why you're doing what you're doing, you get along with how you do it. It doesn't matter. Why are you doing what you're doing? That's what motivates your life. 15. Posthumous people, like me for example, are less well understood than timely ones, but better heard. More strictly, we are never understood, and hence our authority. Nietzsche already says here, and he says this again in his later work, Ecce Homo, posthumous people, basic people that will be understood after their death. People aren't going to get me now. People will only get me later. We're better heard. We're not understood, and hence our authority. That's why we're gonna mean something. Nietzsche's saying that this about himself in the future. Section 24. To search for beginnings, you turn into a crab, pinching, going one way or the other. The historian looks backwards in the end. He even believes backwards. People studying history, especially in the sense of the time, being saturated with, German history, they look backwards. They think of everything as being something determined in the past, and that's not right. 26. I mistrust all systematists and avoid them. The will to system is a lack of integrity. Someone like Hegel, trying to build a system, saying everything's going to fit into this model. Not everything does. Let's move forward a little bit into the first real section, the problem of Socrates, or Socrates. Here, Nietzsche's echoing some things that he said already in The Birth of Tragedy, the problem with philosophy, the problem with Socrates. He says this: throughout the ages, the wisest of men have passed the same judgments on life. It is no good. Like Socrates. Always and everywhere their mouths have been heard to produce the same sound, a sound full of doubt, full of melancholy, full of weariness of life, full of resistance to life. Even Socrates, as he was dying, life is one long illness. I owe, this is the last words of Socrates in the Phaedo, I owe the Savior Asclepius a cock. Give the god of medicine a chicken. Those were Socrates' last words. Even Socrates had enough of it. This is nothing. This is the sickness of Plato. He says, were they all perhaps no longer steady on their feet, belated, dottery decadence? Would wisdom perhaps appear on earth as a raven excited by a faint whiff of carrion? Socrates got things wrong, is what Nietzsche is saying. Going after a celebration of death. I myself was first struck by this impertinent thought that the great wise men are all declining types, in the very case where it meets with its strongest opposition from scholarly and unscholarly prejudice. I recognize Socrates and Plato as symptoms of decay, as tools of the Greek dissolution, as pseudo-Greek, as anti-Greek, and he says, I said this in Birth of Tragedy, the consensus sapientium, that is really the consensus of wisdom, I've realized it more and more, proves least of all that they were right in what they agreed on. It proves rather that they themselves, these wisest of men, were somehow in physiological agreement in order to have the same negative attitude towards life. These philosophers hated life, is what Nietzsche is saying. They didn't get it rightly. Value judgments on life, whether for or against, can ultimately never be true. You should do this, you shouldn't do this. They have value only as symptoms. They can be considered only as symptoms. This is going to be helpful for us when we get to Freud in a little bit. In themselves, such judgments are foolish. We must really stretch out our fingers and make the effort to grasp this astonishing finesse that the value of life cannot be assessed. It's going to be interesting also if you ever read Ayn Rand, who sees herself as very much in line with Nietzsche. Let's look at section 3. Socrates belonged by extraction to the lowest of the people. Socrates was rabble. We can even still see how ugly he was. But ugliness in itself an objection is to Greek practically a refutation. Was Socrates really a Greek? Ugliness is often enough the expression of a crossbred development stunted by crossbreeding. If not, then it appears as a development in decline. What he's saying here is, in Greek notions, often beauty is equated with good. Aphrodite is good. Athena is good. And ugliness is associated with evil. This is why even in mythological stories, from today, you say something like Snow White. Snow White, she's the protagonist. She's beautiful. The evil witch, she's ugly. In fact, she's originally the most beautiful one of them all, but she takes on ugliness just to fulfill the destiny of destroying Snow White. She takes on ugliness, and her ugliness is considered part of who she is and her character. This is who she's really this ugly person. Sometimes you get this in other stories like Cinderella, where Cinderella is beautiful, but she's got the ugly stepsisters and the ugly stepmother. Ugliness is bad. Beauty is considered good. He's saying, yeah, this is Greek thinking. Socrates goes against this, where beauty is, no, it might look like beauty on the outside, but it's not really beauty if it's not there on the inside. Section 5. With Socrates, Greek taste switches over in favor of dialectics. What is actually going on here? Above all, it means that a noble taste is defeated with dialectics and the rabble comes out on top. Before Socrates, dialectical matters were disapproved of in polite society. They were seen as bad manners because they were revealing. Even this dialectical manner, not necessarily a Hegelian dialectical manner, but disputing about things. Well, is beauty really beauty? Is it skin deep? What does beauty mean? No. In the ancient world, people just said, this is this, and that's it. You don't like it? Too bad. Maybe I'll kill you. Maybe I won't. And he's saying dialectics, this idea of reasoning, getting truth is getting at some sort of reasoning or argumentation and demonstration. This is a new kind of cowardice that didn't exist in the past. Section 6. You choose dialectics only when you have no other means. Going, no, we're going to get at truth. No, people think this is beautiful. People think physical appearance is beautiful. No, it's not. When we explore the notion of beauty, we realize we can't define what beauty is. Yeah, you only do this kind of stuff when you have no other means. You know that using it provokes mistrust. It's not very convincing. You know, argumentation is not very successful. Nothing is easier to dismiss than the effect of a dialectician produces. The experience of any assembly where speeches are made is proof of that. Okay, just someone who gives a good speech doesn't necessarily have to be a good one filled with logic. Politicians of any party, for example, are very convincing. It can only be an emergency defense in the hands of those who have no other weapons left. When it comes to dialectics, getting at truth, let me demonstrate to you this is the case using logic. Only a coward does this. He says that's why the Jews were dialecticians. Reynard the Fox was one. What? And Socrates was one too? Of course he was. And others. Let's move forward a bit. Let's move to page 462, Reason in Philosophy. This is where Nietzsche comes down on philosophers. You ask me, what are all the idiosyncrasies of philosophers? One thing's their lack of historical sense, their hatred of the very idea of becoming, their Egyptism. They think they're doing a thing on honor when they dehistoricize, sub specie aeterni. All right, that is under the species of the eternal. All right, or from the view of eternity, as your book translates it for you. When they make a mummy out of it, all that philosophers have been handling for thousands of years is conceptual mummies. Nothing real has ever left their hands alive. He's saying what philosophers are doing oftentimes, or they're making stuff up. They're almost embalming ideas of the past and trying to make them persist for today. That's not the way to go. Philosophers don't deal with living truths. They deal with mummifications of the past. Whether it be religious philosophers, even atheistic philosophers, what they're doing is they're taking notions from the past, mummifying them, and then presenting them to us today. He says in section 2, 462, I shall set apart with great respect the name of Heraclitus, right? Greek philosopher. Everything's moving, everything's changing. Fire is representative of reality. If the rest of philosophical populace rejected the evidence of the senses because they showed multiplicity and change, that would be Parmenides. He rejected their evidence because they showed things as if they had duration and unity. Heraclitus, too, did the senses an injustice. Like, he wasn't perfect. They do not lie either at the way of the Eleatics, like Parmenides, ancient Greek philosophers who believed that change wasn't real. Believe, or as he believed, they do not lie at all. What we make of their evidence is what gives rise to the lie. For example, the lie of unity, the lie of materiality, of substance, of duration, all the ancient Greek problems, these are nonsense. Reason is what causes us to falsify the evidence of the senses. Nietzsche's not a fan of reason, because reason is this thing that we invoke to basically stamp our explanations. We can say, oh, the reason why things are this way is because reason, and then we put the stamp down. Locke did this, the ancients did this, Parmenides did this. He's saying even Heraclitus did this. We do this, and he thinks, in the case of Heraclitus had a notion of logos, which is the Greek word for reason. Like he would say, why is the world the way it is? Well, it just is. That's what's underlying reality. And he's saying philosophers are just using this ad hoc expression, reason, to just say this is how things are, this is why they should, why they should be. We do this with metaphysics, we do this with epistemology, we also do this with morality. Why should we do this way? Because that's the way it should be, because it's obvious, inherent to our reason. That's what Nietzsche is saying. Let's take a look at page 471, section 6. The entire realm of morality and religion belongs under this concept of imaginary causes. Now, he's already talked about before about what philosophy does often is making up causes, saying this is why things are the way they are, and it's seeming obvious, and him saying, no, it's not. But listen to what he says here. Explanation for unpleasant general feelings. They are determined by beings which are hostile to us. Evil spirits, most famous case, understanding the hysterics as witches. Just explaining phenomena like, why were women doing stuff that was in opposition to others? Well, because they're witches, obviously. They are determined by actions which cannot be sanctioned, the feeling of sin, of sinfulness, foisted onto a physiological unease. One can always find reasons to be dissatisfied with oneself. Something's wrong with you. That's easy. And so Christianity has an easy job of saying, you know why you're so dissatisfied with yourself? It's your sinfulness. They are determined as punishments, as a repayment for something we should not have done, should not have been. You were born into sin, as David says in the Psalms. In sin did my mother conceive me. In iniquity did my mother conceive me. Impudently generalized by Schopenhauer into a proposition which reveals morality as it really is, as the poisoner and slanderer of life. Every great pain, whether bodily or mental, states what we deserve, for it cannot come to us if we did not deserve it. And he says that from Die Welt aus Wille und Vorstellung, the world is will and representation. They are determined as the consequences of thoughtless actions which turned out badly. The emotions, the senses posited as cause, as to blame, physiological crises interpreted with the help of other crises as deserved, explanations for pleasant general feelings. These are determined by trust in God. They are determined by the awareness of good works, the so-called good conscience, a physiological state which someone looks so similar to successful digestion that one could confuse the two. They are determined by the successful outcome of undertakings. Naively false conclusion. The successful outcome of an undertaking gives a hypochondriac or a Pascal no pleasant general feelings at all. They are determined by faith, charity, hope, the Christian virtues. We get those from, those are 1 Corinthians, faith, hope, and love. Charity is sometimes translated, or the word is agape in the Greek. Sometimes it's translated as love in modern English, charity in more antiquated English. Those are the Christian virtues, faith, hope, and love. In truth, all these so-called explanations are states which result from something, a kind of translation of feeling of pleasure or displeasure into the wrong dialect. One is poisonous to hope because one's physiological feeling is strong and rich again. One trusts in God because one is calmed by a feeling of plenitude and strength. Morality and religion belong entirely under the psychology of error. In every single case, cause and effect are confused. Or truth is confused with the effect of what is believed to be true, or a state of consciousness is confused with the causality of the state. So, what Nietzsche's saying here is there's a confusion often in religion. Like, I feel happy in my religion. Well, you don't feel happy, but there's kind of a sense in which the things that you think make you happy but don't make you happy because you kind of esteem that they do. And that's why the religious person, Nietzsche's saying here, can go through pain and suffering and go, no, I'm happy because I say I'm happy. All right, everything, it's what the Lord has willed. That is problematic as well for Nietzsche. Finally, let's take a look at one of Nietzsche's very late works, The Antichrist. which he subtitles A Curse on Christianity from 1888. Section 2. What is good? Not what is good based on some definition of, what are the. Let's take a look at the etymology of the words, and what is good according to people. Does it mean, niceness and all that? Here it is. What is it? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, the Willensmacht, power itself in man. That's what's good. Good is conducive to power. Period. Section. Continuing section 2. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome, not contentment. Take that, Aristotle. But more power. That's what happiness is. Not peace at all, but war. Not virtue, but proficiency. Virtue in the Renaissance style. Virtu, like Machiavelli. Virtue free of moralic acid. The weak and ill-constituted shall perish. First principle of our philosophy of the future, and one shall help them to do so. What is more harmful than any vice? Active sympathy for the ill-constituted and weak. What is that? Oh, it's Christianity. The problem I raise here is not what ought to succeed mankind in the sequence of species, the human being is a conclusion, but what type of human being one ought to breed, ought to will, as more valuable, more worthy of life, more certain of the future. This more valuable type has existed often enough already, but as a lucky accident, as an exception, never as willed. There have been people that are good in this sense and look towards the future, but it's a rare occurrence and it just ends up happening. It's not something that we've intended. He has rather been the most feared, has hitherto been virtually the thing to be feared, and out of fear the reverse type has been willed, bred, achieved, the domestic animal, the herd animal, the sick animal man, the Christian. Mankind does not represent a development of the better or the stronger or the higher in the way that is believed today. Progress is merely a modern idea, that is to say, a false idea. The European of today is of far less value than the European of the Renaissance. Onward developing is not by any means, by any necessity, the same thing as elevation, advance, strengthening. We don't get stronger and stronger and stronger. If anything, we celebrate weakness, weakness, and weakness. In another sense, there are cases of individual success constantly appearing in the most various parts of the earth and from the most various cultures in which a higher type does manifest itself. Something which in relation to collective mankind is a sort of overman, Übermensch. Such chance occurrences of great success have always been possible, and perhaps always will be possible, and even entire races, tribes, nations can under certain circumstances, represent such a lucky hit. Again, Nietzsche is not talking about the ascendancy of the Aryan or white race. Anybody can do this if they've got the right gumption to do so. Section 5. One should not embellish or dress up Christianity. It has waged a war to the death against this higher type of man. Christianity and the notion of the Übermensch do not get along. It has excommunicated all the fundamental instincts of this type. It has distilled evil, the evil one, Satan, the Antichrist, out of these instincts. The strong human being as the type of reprehensibility, as the outcast. Christianity has taken the side of everything weak, base, ill-constituted. It has made an ideal out of opposition to the preservative instincts of strong life. It has depraved the reason even of the intellectually strongest natures by teaching men to feel the supreme values of intellectuality as sinful, as misleading as temptations. The most deplorable example, the depraving of Pascal. Now, he gives the example of Pascal, French thinker that I don't want to get into. But just if we consider the Christian narrative of the downfall into sin, for example, Genesis 3, what was the crime of Adam and Eve? They sought knowledge. What was going on? Look, in Genesis 1 and 2, God had set up the Garden of Eden, and especially in Genesis 2, he plants a tree in the garden, the knowledge of good and evil, and says, you can eat the fruit of any tree that you want, not this one. This one has knowledge. Don't touch it. Don't eat it. Don't touch it. If you eat, if you eat of it, you'll surely die. Now the serpent shows up and says to Eve, did God really say that? Did God say if you eat of it, you'll surely die? Eve says, yeah, he said even if we touch it, we'll surely die. God doesn't say that, by the way. Go back and look at the narrative. God doesn't say that. Eve says that herself. Yeah, if we even touch it, we'll surely die. Now, maybe that's an extra instruction that God gave, but we don't see an explicit reference to it. And then she eats of the fruit of the tree of good and evil. Adam, who's there with her, eats of it, and their eyes are opened. And they have knowledge of things. It's not that they become evil per se, like they become these some sort of villains, but they know about the difference between good and evil. Moreover, what the problem is that they sinned by disobeying God, but they learned knowledge as a result. And Adam responds when God says, hey, where are you? Well, we knew we did this, so we tried to hide from you. And God's like, and then he curses. The first thing he does is curses them. He says, Adam, you're going to work by the sweat of your brow. You're going to have to work really hard. And Eve, by the way, since you started this, you're going to have terrible childbirth. It's going to be really painful. Thanks. Oh, but everything's fine, though. I'm going to cover you with skins. And you'll be cast out from the garden, but there's a way out from this. But it's all punishment for disobedience. But what we see in Christianity is that really the cause of evil and the cause of sin in the world is a seeking for knowledge of human beings trying to do things in their own way. And that's why a constant refrain in Christianity against sometimes philosophy is, and other forms of wisdom acquisition, is people question what God has said. Did God really say? That's sinful. Consider the words of Paul in Philippians. Do not be deceived by vain philosophy. I want to say that's Philippians. It might be Colossians. Philippians or Colossians. Do not be deceived by vain philosophy, in the words of the Apostle Paul. Things that trick you and deceive you. Section 6. It is painful, a dreadful spectacle, which has opened up before me. I have drawn back against the curtain of the depravity of man, a feature of Calvinism. In my mouth, this word is protected against, at any rate, one suspicion that it contains a moral accusation of man. It is, I should like to underline the fact, free of any moralic acid, and this is to the extent that I find the depravity precisely where hitherto one most consciously aspired to virtue, to divinity. That is to say, at this point, when Calvin or other Christian thinkers talk about the depravity of man, how bad human beings are, sometimes it's actually talking about the goodness. The bad things that they do are good things. Things that we think of as bad are often good. Now, I think we can think of examples today. When we think of rape, we're never going to think of it in a good context. I don't see that happening. In the past, they did. To rape was to conquer. Like that would be considered a virtue in certain contexts. But the celebration of weakness. All right. Well, let's just suffer what we can, and everything will be fine. And that would be not a celebration of life, but a celebration of décadence, or death, decadence. It's nihilistic. Look, he says this in this last section of section 6. I consider life itself instinct for growth, for continuance, for accumulation of forces, for power, Macht. Where the will to power is lacking, there is decline. My assertion is that this will is lacking in all the supreme values of mankind, that value of decline. Nihilistic values hold sway under the holiest names. Nietzsche is not celebrating nihilism here. He says that nihilism is something swimming around, saturating the religious viewpoint and perspective. Look at section 11 if you want to see where Nietzsche talks about Kant being an idiot. But what I want to do, I think, there's a lot of stuff in the Antichrist, but I think for our purposes, I want to go to the end. What does Nietzsche have to say about Christianity in toto? Or that is in total. Again, there's a lot of stuff in here. that I recommend you read, but I don't want to overburden you with too much information, especially at this point in the semester. What does he say here? What's like? Let's not be ambiguous. What's Nietzsche's view on Christianity? He says this, section 62. This is page 498. With that, okay, and we're talking about we'll never get rid of Christianity. All right, it's gonna be there. Now, what do we got? What's his view on Christianity? With that, I have done and pronounced my judgment. Here's what he says. In the final analysis, here's what I have to say about Christianity. I condemn Christianity. I bring against the Christian church the most terrible charge any prosecutor has ever uttered. To me, it is the extremest thinkable form of corruption. It has had the will to the ultimate corruption conceivably possible. The Christian church has left nothing untouched by its depravity. It has made of every value a disvalue, of every truth a lie, of every kind of integrity a vileness of soul. People still dare to talk to me about its humanitarian blessings. Oh, look, think about all the good Christianity has done. To abolish any state of distress, whatever has been profoundly inexpedient to it. It has lived on states of distress. It has created states of distress in order to externalize itself. The worm of sin, for example, sin's going to get you wherever you go. It was only the church which enriched mankind with a state of distress. The church basically invented the concept of sin, that it's everywhere, that it's pervasive, that it's ubiquitous. You've got it. There's nothing you can do. You're going to need a cure. You're going to need Jesus. Equality of souls before God. Didn't Christianity do this? Didn't it make equality before God? Especially Protestantism. We're all right there. This falsehood, this pretext for the rançon of all the base-minded, those at the bottom. This explosive concept, which finally became a revolution, modern idea, and the principle of the decline of the entire social order is Christian dynamite. It's interesting. In the Greek New Testament, the Christian word for the Greek word for power, like Macht in German, is Dynamin, where we get our English word dynamite. This Christian dynamite, humanitarian blessing of Christianity. To cultivate out of humanitas, the general idea of the human, a self-contradiction. He's thinking Luther here, all right? Man is at the same time saved and the sinner. Like, man, we're great, but we're terrible. We can achieve so much, but we're sinners, and we'll never achieve more than beyond our sin. An art of self-violation, a will to falsehood at any price, an antipathy, a contempt for every good and honest instinct. These are the blessings of Christianity. He's saying Christianity, what has it done? Made a lot of doubt, said a lot of terrible things about humans. That's really what it's done. Parasitism. It's a parasite. It's the sole practice of the church. With its ideal of green sickness, of holiness, draining away all blood, all love, all hope for life. All the things that Christianity says it claims. Hope, love, life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. John, I think, chapter 14, if I'm not mistaken. All those virtues, love, hope, life, those aren't in Christianity. They're antitheses. If anything, they've been inverted by Jesus to mean something otherwise. What is love? Not to do what you want, but to do what someone else wants. What is hope? Not to desire after something, but to go, no, I'm going to wait. Things may be bad now, but things are going to be okay in the future in some indeterminate time. Faith, to believe in something. To believe in that which cannot be. The beyond as the will to deny reality of every kind. The cross as a badge of recognition for this most subterranean, that is literally underground, like below, conspiracy there's ever been. A conspiracy against health, beauty, well-constitutedness, bravery, intellect, benevolence. That is good willing of soul against life itself. He's saying here, again, this is why I say Nietzsche is not a nihilist. He's saying Christianity is nihilism. It's against life itself. It's a celebration of death. What does Christ say? Christ says, die to yourself, take up your cross and follow me, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer will say in um, The Cross of Discipleship, German work of the 20th century. Nietzsche saying, that's not life. Dying to yourself, taking up your cross, take up your cross, follow with a cross, a symbol of death. That's not life, that's death. And Christianity is actually entirely fascinated with death. What is its symbol? What is the, if you could reduce Judaism to a symbol, what is it? The Star of David today. If you could reduce Islam to a symbol, it's probably going to be the crescent moon. Maybe the full moon, if you're in Jerusalem. What's the symbol of Christianity? It's a cross. Literally, it's like having imagine a religion having a symbol of the electric chair, or a syringe of death, or something like that. The headsman's axe. Its symbol is a symbol of death. Now that death is celebrated through death, life. Through 2 Corinthians, he who knew no sin became sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God through Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. But what Christianity ends up being is a celebration of death, not of life, but of death. The death of Christ is what enables the life of those in Christ. Romans 6, what is baptism? The main Christian sacrament, or if you're a Baptist, the main Christian, what's the word they use? Ordinance is, other than the Lord's Supper, okay, which also is saturated in death. This is my body, which is broken for you. This bread and wine, if you're certain forms of Christianity, it is his body. If it's not his body and blood, it represents his body and blood. Celebrates death. I'm dying for you. Take this, eat it. But baptism, where Baptists, they dunk people. Other Christians, they sprinkle people. All right, aspersion versus submersion, whatever it is. Look at the words of Romans 6. Buried with Christ into death, raised into the newness of life. That comes from Romans 6. What does baptism represent? Literally dying. It's not, people think of it sometimes as just a cleansing, like, it's like washing away one's sins. Look at the words of Romans 6. Buried with Christ into death, raised into the newness of life. It's like through dying, you rise again, just as Christ died and rose again, but there's still a focus on the death. Even God had to die. Gott ist tot. Hence, Nietzsche's play on those words. Throughout much of his writing since Also sprach Zarathustra, Christianity is against life itself. All the virtues that Christianity celebrates, okay? All the virtues that Christianity celebrates are against life. Do Christian virtues want you to boast for yourself, to be bold, to be expressive, to find yourself? Christianity doesn't care about yourself. No. You need to die to yourself. That's not life, is what Nietzsche is saying. That's Christianity, surely, but that's not life, dying to oneself. He continues, wherever there are walls, I shall inscribe this eternal accusation against Christianity upon them. I can write in letters which make even the blind see. I call Christianity the one great curse, the one great intrinsic depravity, the one great instinct for revenge, which no expedient is sufficiently poisonous, secret, subterranean, petty. I call it the one immortal blemish of mankind. And one calculates time from the dies nefastus, on which that is, I think, the really nasty day in Latin. Let's see what it says. Unlucky day. Sure, that'll work. Nasty day, like nefarious day. That's where the roots are there, like nefastus. Like really nasty, nefarious day on which this fatality arose. From the first day of Christianity, why not rather from its last, from today, revaluation of all values. Christianity's got, like, all the things that Christianity values are wrong. Christianity has inverted the values which really matter, as he's established in so many of his writings. So what does he say here? What's his maxim? Reevaluate. Let's start out from scratch. That's what it means to reevaluate all that. Like all the values that we have, like all this stuff is good. Like, oh well, death, die to yourself, die to Christ. Die. Don't do what you want to do. Suppress that thing. Romans 7. The very thing I want to do, I don't want to do, because the wages of sin is death, and therefore I'm going to die unless I'm in Christ. All that celebration of death. Stop it. Reevaluate all values. That's the maxim here. God is dead. Christianity, therefore, ought to be doomed. Yet here we are still all playing along with Christianity. Nietzsche will say, even those that are not Christians, often, like atheists today, even 21st century, are still following along, almost coloring in Christian coloring books. They're still doing the same. They might say, "Oh, Jesus wasn't divine," and yeah, Christian morality is bad. They're still playing along with the majority of Christian morality. No, Nietzsche says, reevaluate all values, and that is the philosophy of the future. Now, Nietzsche says some other things in his final work, which I'm not going to go into, Ecce Homo, which is, in your book, it starts on page 500. And there, it's kind of a Nietzsche's take on all his own works. I encourage you to read it. I don't want to go into it too much here for the sake of time, especially when your papers are due. But if you can, go through it and look at how he talks about his own works, because I think it's very interesting. But here we can see there's a theme, especially in his later works, where there's much more of a bitterness against Christianity and dismantling it. There's certain aspects, even earlier in the Antichrist, which I did not go into, where he admires Jesus as a person. Maybe Jesus was even strong in some ways, going into the temple with a whip. Here's what you all are going to do. You're going to do this. You're going to think this way. But the certain kind of Christianity, which ends up being almost a lustfulness for weakness. How can I make myself as weak as possible? How can I turn the other cheek? How can I give my tunic to someone else? How can I walk the second mile? That's not life, says Nietzsche. And so the critique there, the notion of resentment too, is that this is of course what weak people do, but the critique here of Christianity and religion in general, Christianity in particular, is that this is not letting us, this Christian normalcy does not let us get at ourselves. This is part of the reason why we don't know ourselves. And Marx said similar things. It's ideology, it's the frameworks that we have that don't let us know ourselves, that we don't know ourselves rightly. Freud, when we get to him, is going to say similar things, that there are aspects about ourselves that we've inherited from the systems that we have that are mistaken, and that's why we need to go into a kind of analysis, in Freud's case, a psychoanalysis, which is going to expunge the bad interpretations. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but that's his motivation. Get rid of the bad, wrong, erroneous interpretations of who we are and what we believe and think, and get at what's really there and what's going on beneath the surface. And that's that when it comes to Nietzsche.